how do we draw on the expertise of other businesses and other companies? Sports is a business. I think that's another important thing to remember.
Welcome to episode 122 of The Route, presented by White Whale Marketing. The Route is a glorified sports business coffee chat that has a new guest every episode as we share their experiences and route in sports. As always, I'm Christopher Nascimento, and let's get started. Before we get into today's guest, just a couple things to cover before we begin. As always, follow us on social media. So if you're watching us on video, you can see at the top right corner here, this is at The Route Sports. That's on all of the traditional platforms, including LinkedIn. So if you're listening to this podcast, there's a good chance you're working in the sports business space or you're trying to get into it. Check us out on LinkedIn. It's a great way to maybe start your network or even just kind of expand it, connect with myself, guests, or just people interacting with the post. So check us out there at The Route Sports. And then that's also Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all that good stuff there. And then lastly, before we get into the guest, just take a couple seconds here to subscribe or follow to the podcast, whatever platform you're on. We're on YouTube here underneath the White Whale Marketing channel. We have our own The Route playlist, and we're on all the major platforms like Amazon, Google, Spotify, Apple, X, Y, Z, and so on and so forth. So take the time, rate 5 stars, do whatever you need to do. It allows the podcast to grow a little more easily. And once you do that, we can now get into today's guest. So I'd now like to welcome someone with a wealth of experience, from being drafted by the Montreal Canadiens in the 1978 draft to being a chairman of the board of governors for the CFL and partner in the Hamilton Sports Group partnerships, amongst many other things. Current CEO of Woodbine Entertainment Group, Jim Lawson. Welcome to The Route. How's it going?
Chris, great. Thanks for having me on. Look forward to our discussion today.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for joining. And when I was just going through your LinkedIn, there's so many interesting things I want to get into. So I think that's a perfect way to start. Take me through your route. So where did it begin? Maybe just your passion for sports when you knew you were going to work within it, or how your career started to where you are today.
Sure. I mean, it's not necessarily the type of thing that you plan. You do the best you can. I think there's a large segment of our population that's interested in sports, but let's park that for a minute. As far as my own history, my father was a great athlete. He played junior A hockey for the Toronto Marlboros. The late Harold Ballard was his coach, and he played for the Hamilton Wildcats in the Canadian Football League. And was the youngest, and still is the youngest starting quarterback to win the Grey Cup, which they won in 1943. So, and my father stayed involved in sports. My brother was a quarterback at Western and quarterback at Mac, and took the Burlington Braves junior team to the national championship. So, suffice to say, I was in and around sports growing up, and played all of them. I played football through high school. I played AAA baseball in Burlington to the time I was 15 or 16, and of course played hockey. And so I always, I always had a passion for sports. And of course, Chris, with your audience, that's not unusual. But I in terms of my hockey career, I was fortunate enough to, and probably had the foresight at the time. I always wanted to play college hockey. I wanted to pursue my education. I had opportunities. I was drafted by the Ottawa 67s. I was traded during grade 12. What turned out to be my last year in high school, because there was still grade 13 back in 1975. But I was traded to the Peterborough Petes for a guy named Bobby Miller, who the Peterborough had his rights, and Ottawa wanted him for the playoffs. And so Brian Kilray traded my rights to Roger Nielsen. But anyway, I told Roger Nielsen I wasn't going to go to Peterborough, that I still was intent on playing college hockey, which I did. I was recruited by a number of schools and ended up choosing Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, largely, I think, because I had a good friend, Tim Bothwell. Tim, I grew up with and played street hockey with, and he played in the NHL for 12 years, mostly in St. Louis. So the career path was set then, I guess. I went to Brown largely with a view. I didn't know what it all meant, but largely with a view to going to law school. And after I graduated from Brown, I signed my senior year. I signed with the Montreal Canadiens for 3 years. My second year, I completely tore my knee up at a time where knee surgery. This was probably 1981, 40 years ago, when knee surgeries aren't what they are today. And I was 4 months in a cast with torn ligaments in my knee, and decided at that time to go to law school. And I think more than anything, Chris, whether it's regardless of the path you take, I mean, I'm a big advocate, not to suggest that people need to go to law school, but I'm a big advocate that legal training is a good background for any number of things. And of course, in the sporting world, you can see it, and it's helped me along the way in my career path, from everything from contracts to other forms, collective bargaining agreements, which I was involved with at the Canadian Football League. I'm still involved with them at Woodbine Entertainment, and there's a lot of things that are done by contract, of course, and more than anything, I got a good foundation for a career in sports from my legal background.
Yeah, no, that's already so interesting. Where I was just trying to take down notes there. Where, funny enough, I had knee surgery a couple of weeks ago, and I'm thankful that times have changed with technology, and looks like I'll be walking in a couple of weeks here. But I have a few things, cause not only just the knee surgery, but just even prior when talking about the OHL, and I wanted to see if that would maybe change route, just maybe going back to that time period. So let's say that trade never took place and your rights stayed with Ottawa. Would that have changed anything for you, or were you still very much intent on going to college?
No, I was very much intent on going to college. If anything, no, Brian Kilray had a great reputation, so it had really nothing to do with the coaching. Roger Nielsen, the late Roger Nielsen, and I guess the late, and he brought his dog. He brought his dog to our house, and if anything, I was interested. And Roger Nielsen was a high school teacher in Peterborough. This is before he ended up coaching the Toronto Maple Leafs. But if anything, Roger was convinced me. He certainly convinced my dad that I should go to Peterborough that fall, and I said no. I really want to go to and play college hockey, which in 1975 was not an obvious thing to do. But I'm glad I did. The decisions we all make in life, you never know. You come to this forks in the road, as we all experience, and deciding to play college hockey rather than junior, I don't know. It's really hard to know how things would have changed if I'd gone and played in Peterborough. But it really had nothing to do with the OHL or the Ottawa 67s versus Peterborough. It had everything to do that my mindset was I wanted to get an education first and foremost, and I was just always wired that way.
Absolutely, that makes a ton of sense. And I guess kind of piggybacking on that topic, obviously you said you signed with the Canadiens, and unfortunately you tore ligaments in your knee, and then you ended up going on to law school. Was the mindset always like, even though you signed a pro contract, you still wanted to complete your school, whether it's in the off season or on your downtime, or was that something that you still wanted to pursue, even though you'd essentially be going pro?
Yeah, it was. I don't think I ever lost the appetite I'm not sure why, because no one in my family was a lawyer. I don't think, maybe it was from growing up and watching. Now I'm dating myself, Perry Mason on TV, and I thought lawyers went to court all the time, which is nothing like my law career. But it never left me that I wanted to go back to school and pursue a legal career.
Sure, that makes total sense. And I guess before we continue on with your career, obviously the people that are listening to this podcast are typically, let's say, younger sports professionals or even those in university, right, where they're trying to figure out, hey, where should I apply once I end? Um, I know you're mentioning you're going to Brown, but now that you have this experience and maybe you have that, 2020 insight for us, what would be the type of things you'd recommend to a potential listener of, hey, these are things you should look for when attending or selecting a school?
Yeah. Well, listen, everyone has different strengths and gravitates towards different things, but a few things come to mind. I mean, I think it's important and it's probably underrated. You always need to learn and write. I think people who can be good writers. I know sometimes the liberal arts education gets downplayed, but I, as an employer, um, we're very interested in this, in the sports world, in people that can write, people that can speak. I think it's critical, and I only mention it because I think it's underplayed in today's world, how important it is to be able to write well and put paragraphs together and put a story together. And that's just not about communications in the classic sense of the word, but I really think it is important. I also think that and this is an obvious one, but the world has changed so dramatically that being able to deal with today's technology, and Chris, I'm sure you deal with it all the time. Whether it's editing or any and again, just the distribution of a sporting product. It's one thing to use languages, to be able to write, to get that story down, to communicate within a sporting organization. You're doing it whether it's internally or externally, and I'm not solely focusing when I say that in the communications world, but then it needs to be distributed. And I think in today's world, again, people who are technologically strong have a big advantage. And I think that in professional degrees, different professional degrees can take you down different roads. I mean, look at the emphasis on salary caps these days, whether it be the National Hockey League or well, really all professional leagues have some form of salary cap, whether it be with dealing with the unions in hockey, or whether it be dealing with each team in the leagues, football, baseball, hockey, you name it. So there's a path right there. Someone who is very adept with numbers and accounting. I think it's important to develop a skill set. And I've mentioned writing, but if you look ahead at adding on that next degree or postgraduate degree, accounting is important. I've already mentioned the merits of law. I'm certainly business. I think there are a lot of things that people don't realize. Well, why would I want to, if I want to be in sports management, do I really need to be a CA? Well, yeah, there's a good chance, because that person within the sports management group, they will need expert accounting help, whether that has to do with budgeting or whether that has to do with players' salaries or salaries caps. Financial acumen is key. And those are the types of things that take you into other roles. I mean, Kyle Dubas, he went to Brock for sports management, but he quickly became an expert in salary cap management. And I think that's what made him very valuable to Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. And one could go on and on, but I can tell you from being in sports organizations, there's a lot of expertise that's required to make it go. So, I would always be looking as a young person to say, hey, what's going to give me that edge? And if I need to go for a professional degree, if I need to, using my example, I went and worked at law firms for a long time. And, coming out of law school, I thought I wanted to be a player agent. And I thought, yeah, but what do I have to offer? I don't have, if I don't have anything to offer the players, so I need to uh, be an expert in contracts law to help players with their contracts. I need the financial acumen. Wealth management's important these days. Certified financial accountants, CFAs, financial planning. There's a lot of things. I mean, so if you graduate from undergrad or even law school and say, hey, I want to be a player agent or I want to be involved in that manner, it's just not that simple. You need to develop an expertise and particularly continue to grow yourself and improve yourself and pursue your potential by strengthening your skill set so you're valuable to someone. And whether it's valuable to players or valuable to a sports organization, a team, a league, players, you need to keep in mind that you've got to continuous improvement is going to set you apart. If you come in with great financial acumen, that general manager is going to love you, saying, wow, I can just hand all that to this young person who knows how to do all that.
Yeah, I know that makes a lot of sense. And just maybe kind of looking at my career, I noticed when I was in school, I had a certain idea in mind, right? I think prior to starting the podcast, I mentioned CMO. That was always my idea, right? I love to do it because it sounded so creative. But then once I started working more, I was like, hey, that's not necessarily where my skill set was, because I started school in accounting and I worked in accounting, and then I realized I had much more of a strategic element to me, and then it kind of just so happened to get into partnerships, right? And that's when I started refining my skills a bit more. So that makes a ton of sense of what you're saying. But
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the just CMOs, the woman that I worked closely with at both the Canadian Football League was a woman named Christina Litz, and Christina is just a wealth of knowledge. She was a lawyer by trade, but at the Canadian Football League, she was head of marketing. And when she left the Canadian Football League, I hired her at Woodbine Entertainment to be our chief commercial officer. And then after about 2 years, and I wish her well, and we're very good friends. She's now chief marketing officer, chief commercial officer for the Winnipeg Jets in the National Hockey League. So, I mean, there's an example of, and I think part of the reason that Christine is very bright, but one of the reason Christina Litz has done well is partly because she had that legal background to fall back on that really helped her, and she became very valuable in marketing and dealing with television contracts at the CFL, dealing with TSN, for example, at Woodbine, dealing with TSN, dealing with our sponsors and partners in terms of marketing, and that is a lot of that is contractual, and you don't think of it that way. But she's at the top of her game. I mean, chief marketing officer for a National Hockey League team in this country is a great job. And I would, as I say, she's a very bright person, but a lot of it comes from her falling back on her legal skills. So there's a good example.
no, absolutely. I think that kind of almost comes back to what you were saying just a little bit ago, where it's almost those soft skills of reading, writing, kind of refining them as you're going through maybe, let's say, a law degree, or let's say you become accounting and maybe your financial acumen, then applying in whatever career path you end up going down. And I guess going back to your route specifically, so you decided to go to law school, you're attending it there, and then how did it transpire? Was it something where you just started doing some clerkships and went on and said, hey, this is something I enjoy and I want to further it? And then how did your career develop afterwards?
Well, I think primarily, I did when I could, I got involved in sports. I went to a major law firm in Toronto, a couple of major law firms, and I always had the eye on the ball that continuously wanted to improve, and I think that is again advice for young people is try and look to take on new challenges. You're only going to get better if you try new things and try new challenges. So if you're working in a sports management group and someone says, well, why don't you go over and learn about social media or content? You should put up your hand first and say, I want to try something different. And it will be hard at first, but the learning curve, while it may be steep, it's worth the challenge. And I think my career legally, I moved around and did different things within a law firm and gained different skill sets, whether it was commercial or lending or securities. I always wanted to try different things and improve. And I think that as that evolved, I became involved in boards. I was asked to go on the board of Woodbine Entertainment back in 2006. So that's quite a few years ago now. And then the Canadian Football League we did a search for an independent chair, and I had some board experience. I had some sports experience, and they interviewed me, and I took that role. And then at Woodbine, I ultimately became more involved in the board. I went from being on different committees on the board to learning how the company worked. And then when they were looking for a CEO to run Woodbine, the board asked me if I would be prepared to do it. And so I stayed involved. I was always involved in sports, and I did everything I could to be involved at Woodbine, at the Canadian Football League, and learn different things. So, for example, at the Canadian Football League, I always stuck up my hand and said I'd like to be involved on the labor relations committee and learn about collective bargaining agreements with professional athletes. And those types of experience, you learn from the best people, and then you're more confident next time you do it. So I'm very confident dealing with collective bargaining agreements at Woodbine now, for example, because I understand a lot of the ins and outs of negotiating a labor agreement.
Yeah, and before we kind of jump all the way to this current role you're in, I just have a kind of a question, even just from my own curiosity, right? Obviously, when you're gaining the experience and you're learning more and you're refining your skills a bit more, but then how do you make the jump from, let's say, beginning at a law firm, obviously maybe growing within it, so then, acquiring, let's say, a board seat at, somewhere like Woodbine? Is it something where it's just a specific skill set that they're looking to fill, or is it just from let's say you're growing your business acumen from all these deals or kind of people you're rubbing elbows with, and how does that transpire?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I said before. It was like, don't be afraid to take on a challenge. So fairly early in 25 years ago, I was asked if I would help form a board for Algoma Steel and Sault Ste. Marie that was coming out of bankruptcy. And I didn't know very much about forming a board or corporate governance 25 years ago. And I said, oh yeah, I can do that. And it was nerve-wracking, and it was I used the term earlier, learning curve, a steep learning curve. But you know what? You learn to put one foot in front of the other each day, and that experience is invaluable. And after that initial board experience, I felt very comfortable putting up my hand and saying, listen, I can do board work now. I can do public company board work. I can do private company board work. And then within boards, I did my best to sit on different committees. As I said, with the Canadian Football League, I believe at Algoma Steel, I sat on the Human Relations Committee, the Corporate Governance Committee, eventually the Audit Committee, as soon as I felt comfortable that I had gained enough financial acumen about the company. So I think that it's one of those things that, people always ask the question, well, all these jobs, I can't get them unless I have experience. And then the question is, well, how do you get any experience if no one's prepared to give you the job in the first place? And that is a challenge. I mean, I hear that from young people all the time. They say, wow, they want experience. I think you have to go in, and once you gain that experience, try different things and grow your experiences, and it builds upon itself. And that's how careers are built. It's not about it's. I think it's more to do with the experiences you have are what sets you apart. Because once you've seen something and done something, you're comfortable doing it again another time.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. Just kind of the trial by fire, right? Where,
Yeah.
I started a business 2 years ago, and I was telling one of my friends, like, hey, would you do it again if you know everything now? I was like, probably not. I'm like, it's a lot scarier than I expected it when I first started it. But I kind of just said, hey, let me just do this one thing at a time, and then you're figuring out as you go. And just like what you're saying with the assignment of developing a board. Hey, did I know how to run a business when I started? No, but you're kind of like figuring out
Yeah.
as you go, and that's how it kind of starts rolling a bit more. So that's very cool. That's how that happened for
It
you.
is, and it's not easy. And to bring it back to your sporting audience, it's like playing hockey and saying, "Hey, I want to play on the power play," and the coach says, "Well, you've never played on the power play before. I'm not going to put you on the power play." And you'll say, "Well, unless you give me a chance and give me some experience, you're always going to be able to say that. So give me a chance, and I'll learn."
Yeah, no, I for sure agree with that. And funny enough, I remember when one of the first jobs I got within sports, one of the things they were just kind of talking one of the meetings about how a lot of the young people or interns they're getting, they kind of just wanted to stick to the role that they were assigned. And then let's say they needed help with operations or something with the field or XYZ on game day, no one would kind of really raise their hand. But they said the people that stuck around or those who kind of climbed the ladder quicker than others was always those who say, hey, I'd do that, or hey, let me figure out how to do it. And then that's how it starts rolling from there as well.
Chris, you've hit the nail on the head. You've got to be prepared to try different things, because if you're in marketing at a sports organization and someone asks you to try the content side or the social media side of that, you should say, I've never done it before, but I'd love to try. And you know what? When you come back to your job in communications or the side of marketing you're in, you're that much more valuable because you know how the pieces of the puzzle all come together. And that's how people move their career along, because they start to understand how they can work together and how difficult someone else's job is. If you've walked a mile in someone's shoes, you understand how hard it is. And so when you're trying to make a sports organization all click together, from communications to social media to content to broadcasting, all those things, if you've tried them, you're going to be much more valuable in an organization if you know how it all works. If you just stay complacent and say, no, I'm happy doing what I'm doing, you're never going to get better.
Yeah, you saying that just made me chuckle because I had a role with Athletico. I was doing marketing, and then one day I was in a meeting with the league, and they're going through a checklist, and they said, "Hey, players, please speak to your communications manager." And they looked at the list and they're like, "Hey, Athletico doesn't have one." They're like, "Okay, talk to Chris." And I was like, "Chris?" I'm like, "I don't know what to do." And I was like, "Okay." And they're like, "Chris, you're in charge of press conferences now." So I was like, "What?" So I remember I had to go on YouTube or watch different TV streams just to hear how press conferences were going to figure it out. And then obviously it ended up working. But that was kind of one of those things where you kind of just left, hey, I don't know how to do that. And kind of getting back to what you were saying about your story about, the board of directors and setting that up. So once you were able to finally do it, then as you said, you had that experience and you're able to start growing and maybe getting involved in more. And I'm seeing here from your LinkedIn as well, obviously you have those board seats within sports, but then you joined somewhere like Sleep Country as well. Is that something where they kind of heard your experience or you knew someone, and how did that progress?
Yeah, I think it really came down to having board experience, and it just seeing different situations. As I said, in the world we live in, I think it's more about experience than anything, and you just consistently have to be prepared to try new things and to grow your experiences, and that can start at a very humbling level. As we said, I mean, go over and build content and edit content within a sports organization. I mean, the world has changed so much, but you certainly begin to understand how things can come together and why you're doing things and learn. And I think in my case, a different career path, but it was all the same things, trying different things and growing your experiences. And then you have the confidence to try different things. The more experience you have, the more confidence you have. And it's not necessarily about marketing yourself or selling yourself. I think it's largely, hey, sticking up your hand. At least for me, I don't know how to do this, but I'd certainly be willing to try. And next thing you know, you're the new expert in the organization.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I guess just kind of maybe diving into that a bit further, when you're sitting on these boards, right, is it something where it's very different from one company to the next? I know you were saying once you gain the experience, you start growing it from there, but I noticed that there's a lot of experience with different boards, but was it where once you're with Sleep Country, like, hey, the way they operate, maybe I could apply it to the CFL in this category? Or is it very much a new challenge every time you went to a different one, or was it just kind of same problem, different industry?
No, I think it's consistent with what we've been talking about, is drawing on your experiences and looking at things differently. And I think where you can, when you're on a board of a company or you're senior management of a company, I think it's important, and this is the culture of Woodbine Entertainment, is to try new things. And so, I think it's invaluable if you're in the steel industry, as I was with Algoma Steel for years. I think it's invaluable to look at how they do things in other industries, because the steel industry may not have it right. So I think, drawing on other experiences in other industries is always important. Taking a fresh look, trying something different, looking at different distribution channels as to how things work, and certainly in the sports organizations, a lot is the same. It's how do we draw on the expertise of other businesses and other companies. Sports is a business. Let's that I think that's another important thing to remember. That at its core, there's some professional athletes, and everyone likes to watch, and it's a game or games, but it's at the same time it's a business. And going into working with Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, or working with any of the pro sports organizations or Woodbine Entertainment, you're not hanging out with the players. It's running a business, and I think it's important to draw on business experiences. And that's why I said earlier, don't think that going in and say, hey, I'd love to be involved in sports. You really have to come in with a skill set, whether that's financial acumen or broadcasting, technology, legal, business. These are, make no mistake, the people who own these sports organizations are business people, and they want results, and they want you to balance a budget, and they want you to market, and they want sales. And the people who are in these organizations, it looks like a lot of fun, but it's a lot of hard work.
Yeah, and I guess just drawing back to, let's say, your experiences within sports, do you mind maybe going from, let's say, the CFL, Hamilton Sports Group, and then also then Woodbine, and then maybe drawing what types of things you're working on, what types of value you're providing to that specific organization, what it kind of looked like from there?
Well, it's interesting that the world of sports has just become more and more competitive, and I think we can all appreciate that. Um, First of all, competition from just media outlets and distributions the way they work today. I mean, boy, oh boy, sitting down last night and watching Netflix, right? There was never, if there wasn't Netflix, you might push yourself to watch a sport or do something you wouldn't normally do. But now there is so much competition, on your phone, just all the media distribution. So the world has grown extremely competitive, and I think that the demographics of sports have changed. The consumers of sports have changed. We could probably do a whole show here now on sports betting and the impact on the world of sports betting, which I'm sure, Chris, you've had some discussions about sports betting. But I think that where I'm headed with this comment about the world being so competitive is a lot of the sports and are challenged these days. The world of professional golf is challenged. The world of professional tennis is challenged. The world of horse racing, which I'm now working in, is challenged. The Canadian Football League is challenged. Major League Baseball is arguably challenged. Soccer's been on a roll in Canada, and soccer is on a roll, of course, across the world. Of course, we just experienced the World Cup, but the Premier League in soccer around the world is number one. The National Football League is a marketing powerhouse, and that may be related, some of it, to sports betting. But the National Football League, they have just done a wonderful job, I think, of developing their product, distributing it, marketing, and building the NFL brand. But a number of the other sports that I've mentioned I believe, are challenged, and they're challenged largely because the new consumer, whether they're 20-year-olds or 30-year-olds, they're all consuming differently these days. They've got lots of choices of different sports, of different entertainment. They don't necessarily like going to the games anymore, or going to the golf course, or going to the tennis courts anymore. It has really challenged the world of, as we know it, of traditional sports from when I was growing up. And largely, I think, one, because there's so much more competition, so many more choices, and secondly, the consumption of those sports is happening differently. It not only are there more choices, but people your age, Chris, are consuming them on their phone. They'd rather watch highlights. They'd rather not necessarily attend the event, and so it's challenged. And so I bring all that back to your question, and sorry for answering it in such a long-winded way, but I had to give you that basis. And so where I'm working with in Woodbine Entertainment and with the Hamilton Sports Group, which owns the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and in my experience with the Canadian Football League, it's really taking the best of what each of those organizations is doing in terms of grappling with the problem that there's a new demographic of consumers, a new demographic of fans out there. And so how do you market with them? How do you use the social media platforms to get through to people? How do you build apps to get people to follow, whether it's fantasy football or whether it's wagering? And now, interestingly enough, the Canadian Football League, certainly all of the sports I've mentioned in Canada, they see an opportunity with the sports betting world opening up. And is that going to bring more attention? Certainly, there's no question that gambling has helped the National Football League. As I said, I believe the National Football League in the last 20 years has done a wonderful job of building their brand and turning it into just a household thing to do on a Sunday afternoon is watch NFL football or Monday night and now Thursday nights and so on. But they've certainly benefited from the sports betting aspect associated with the National Football League, and I think some of the professional leagues who first rejected sports betting, the Gary Bettman in the National Hockey League, they did not want sports betting originally, and now they're embracing it, and as are others. And so, I think in terms of what I've learned is don't, in my role in the organizations I've been in, is don't be afraid to hire good, young, smart people who challenge you, who want to try different things. They may not always have it right, but kudos for trying. And I think that's important to realize we're in a new world with new consumers and try different things, whether it, as I said, whether it's through social media, other distribution platforms, finding ways to market your sport and getting through to that new consumer. Everyone's trying to play, I won't say catch up, but everyone's competing with the National Football League and soccer around the world. And a lot of these other sports are suffering for different reasons. And a lot of it has to do with just new demographics and new consumers. And what I've found is that's why I love working with the Hamilton Sports Group, seeing what we can try new at the Tiger Cats. They've got a great management team in Hamilton, seeing what the overlap there is with Woodbine Entertainment and how we can attract a young, new demographic of fans to horse racing in this country. And there's a lot of overlap in terms of how we do that outreach, whether it's through sports apps or other social media platforms, to market and get people out to consume these sports through different mechanisms.
Yeah, I think with everything you're saying there is just what's so exciting about like sports. I would even say from my end, partnerships, right? Just in the sense of, let's say, gambling, right? And sports betting. That's one of the big things now where I'm pretty sure it's even on this podcast. I had someone from, I think it was Nick Salsky from Points Bet, and he was just saying like some of the activations they're doing for CFL, where essentially, I think one of the things they were talking about was having a certain area on the field. If the running back or let's say even a receiver went over this certain, let's say, red circle, then there'd be a hit on a certain bet, right? And just kind of gamifying the game, which is
right.
Almost like an inception when you think about it. And when you think about it from there, where I have friends, none of them are very much into sports. I'm the only one into sports. They're into movies, this, what, and whatever. But now with sports betting, if they say, hey, I'm going to bet on the Senators and Brady Tkachuk to get 5 shots this game or whatever bet, they're much more in tune because they have, let's say, skin in the game, right?
Yes.
Where they have an investment because they didn't grow up watching the sport. So I think that's kind of the cool thing behind it. And even just like strategic partnerships with games, right? Where kids are now playing, video games from an early age, where that's where they become a fan, right? They become a fan of the game first and then they see it live afterwards. So I think that's kind of the unique thing and kind of cool opportunity, let's say, available with sports.
I absolutely think it's a big opportunity. At the same time, and using my National Football League example, what they have done so well is, yes, they've benefited from sports wagering over the years, the National Football League, but they also have branded themselves in a way that people want to sit down and watch the game. And I think for certain sports to benefit from them, horse racing being among them, the Canadian Football League, you have to ensure that you're not just selling the gambling. You have to get people to be interested in the sport. So there's a danger of relying on that too much. And we at Woodbine are very focused on making sure that we are attracting people to the sport for more than the wagering, because that's how you build fans in the future. You've got to build that the sport And you've seen sports drop off. I mean, when I was growing up, just by way of example, boxing was a big sport. I mean, you could name the 5 favorites for the heavyweight champion of the world in boxing, and you could probably name the middleweights. But you don't. It's fallen off now. Maybe that's for social reasons that boxing isn't popular, but you have to continue to build the love of the sport as opposed to just the gambling aspect of it. So I think that's an important thing for sports organizations to remember is don't just rely on those in-game sports bets because your consumers only going to be interested in that, and that's not probably what you want.
No, I absolutely agree. I just meant it was like more of a good way to kind of maybe pull in people that weren't necessarily into, because then once they get the experience, they feel the environment, and they just hear like the crowd roaring or just the.
Oh, Chris, I'm in agreement with you. I
Yeah,
totally think it's good. I do. I think it's good for sports. And the other aspect of it is how do you benefit financially from it as a sporting organization? And I still think the leagues aren't there yet. And it's a heavy regulatory burden to work through that and ethical and legal burden to work through there's still questions today about if you can kick a 3-point, if you can kick a field goal at the end of the game and it's going to affect the point spread, do you kick it or not kick it, and all of those things that start to become challenging as the world becomes more in tune with sports and sports spreads.
Yeah, there's always going to be more problems that are going to come our way, but I guess that's what's kind of keeps us interested. I have one last question before we kind of wrap up to the final questions I'd like to ask guests. Do you mind maybe just sharing, let's say, your day-to-day or what your role kind of looks like from a macro perspective for someone listening, right? So maybe they're tuning into this episode. They're like, hey, this is cool. Jim is a CEO of Woodbine Entertainment Group. I'm curious what that's about. Do you mind maybe just giving us a quick little 60-second spiel on that, and then we can kind of go from there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's for me in my role as chief executive officer. One thing you find is whether you're responsible for certain decisions or not, you're always held accountable. And so when you the buck often stops with me, and I work well with the senior management team who are excellent. And my day is largely understanding what they're doing. I try not to, if you hire good people, and hopefully, one of my rules in life is to try and hire people that are better than I am and rely on them. And if you're going to do that, you need to let them run the show, and hopefully I'm successful in doing that. But it's important to understand, firstly, how to communicate with everyone and set up good communication mechanisms so that you know what's going on. And secondly, I think on a day-to-day basis, I want to know that the marketing people are talking to the broadcasting people, are talking to the horse racing people. There are many different disciplines that come together, and to some extent, I'm the glue in all of that. So think of a sports organization. You want to know that your player personnel people are talking to your marketing people, are talking to your sales people, are talking to your hospitality people, so that you're packaging everything and understanding. And one of my biggest functions is to ensure that those different disciplines that make a sports organization tick are all talking together and working together. You don't want them operating independently of each other. You want them working together so that, if the Montreal Canadiens are coming into town 3 weeks from now, that you better, as a hockey person, you better make sure that your marketing and social media people know that's happening and that they're planning for it. And that sounds so obvious, but unless they're talking all the time, it's not as obvious as you might think. That might be too obvious an example, but you get the idea. you've got to make sure that everyone is working together. And then secondly, from my perspective, there's a lot of government relations that are going on. Certainly, the horse racing world is heavily regulated, so I'm working with the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation because they're involved in gaming. I'm working with our regulator, which is the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario. From time to time, I'm working with municipal politicians, federal politicians, and it's a regular task for me to be dealing with government agencies, regulators, and that has its own form in different sports, for sure. And so it's suffice to say, there's always lots to do, Chris. But I think the most important thing is in a sports organization is making sure that everyone, at least at my level, is making sure everyone's communicating. And then at other people's levels, the burden is on them to make sure that they're not trying to work independently of one department to another, because it is critically important in a sports organization that everyone is working hand in glove together.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and also that's important. Where I remember, I think a few years ago, I was speaking to someone, and they're saying how the organization they're in, just almost every department was independent. And when I
Yeah.
spoke to them a few years later, they had a huge shift, and they're like, "Hey, everything's really great now because marketing's with business development and sales, and we have weekly meetings all together." He said it made a huge shift, so I can definitely see how that's very impactful. And I guess before we kind of wrap up the podcast, I have two questions I'd like to ask every guest. Thanks. I think it's a perfect way to end it. So I've said this for what is this, 122 episodes now. I'm set. I'm living till I'm 103. I'm guaranteed on that. And when I think of myself at 103, I'm going to be on a rocking chair going back and forth, just thinking back to all these great memories I've had throughout my career. So I want to put that on you. You're 103 as well. You're in a rocking chair, and you're thinking back to your experiences within your career to date. What's maybe one story that kind of stands out to you that at 103 you're going to remember?
Well, listen, I may disappoint you in terms of just pulling one story out, but I'll say this. If I'm sitting there at 103 or maybe at 93, I will reflect back on sports and not because of the individual athletes or the individual games, but I am probably happiest and proudest of working not only with the athletes, but with young people, and that's why I was excited to come on your show. At the end of a career, there's business lessons, whether that's financial lessons and all the things that go on, or transactions, or whatever happens within a sports organization. But the one thing that I'll reflect about in terms of a storyline is that we all rallied around a sport and got to work with some great, I'll say young people, and I mean that are passionate about the sport, are anxious to be involved and roll up their sleeves and do whatever it takes to make that sporting organization goes. I felt that way at the Canadian Football League when I was there. They had a great office. I loved working with the young people at the Canadian Football League. I'm experiencing the same at Woodbine Entertainment today. We've got a wonderful team of young people, and I think, my storyline will be, it was really fun to be involved in sports. It gives you that purpose. The athletes, for the most part, and you can generalize, I think, the athletes are good people. They're hardworking. The people who sell the sport and work in the sport, it's a lot of fun. And my storyline is, I was so lucky to be involved with great people.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect answer, right? Where when you're having fun, time goes so much faster, and like you're saying that, I completely agree. Where it feels like sports is that one thing where, it doesn't represent whether a political party X, Y, or Z. It's more so, hey, this is just an activity I enjoy, and we're coming together. We're just watching people kick a ball, throw a ball, shoot a piece of rubber around, right? It's just kind of simple, right? So I absolutely agree with that. And the last question I like to ask everyone is, obviously we just went into the future. Now if we go into the past, we go sit down and speak to 16, 18-year-old Jim about to head to university. What's one piece of advice that you've now learned throughout your career that you wish you can, share with a younger version of yourself or a listener that you think is very important?
Yeah, well, we've touched upon it, Chris. A couple of things. Don't be afraid to try new things. That would be number one. And I also think that goes with a career path. If people always, when they ask me about, I've got an opportunity to do this job, or I've got an opportunity to do this job, and my advice is, set your goals and make sure that whatever you're doing is moving you forward in life, that you're gaining more experience, that next step, that next job is going to add to the skill set that you have today, so that you're always looking to build and get better and do better. And that again sounds trite, but it's not. People will take a job and move sideways or backwards for $10,000 more a year or whatever. And it's like, I say to them, really, are you really going to improve your career by taking that job? It feels very much like you're going sideways and arguably even backwards. And I think it's very important as you contemplate moving forward to always say to yourself, is this going to help me improve my career and improve my skill set? And if the answer is yes, then I wouldn't be afraid to try something different. And so continuous improvement, pursuing your potential, which is one of our values at Woodbine, if our Woodbine people hear that, I think those are important. Always be looking to move forward. Don't be afraid of change. Don't be afraid of trying new things, and build that skill set so that every job you take, or even within a job, that you're the person saying, I'm willing to give that a try, and you're going to be better for it.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic piece of advice. Just to maybe for a listener, I can maybe kind of connect to that where, there was a moment in time, contracts weren't when I was first starting, they weren't working out, and I was like, hey, like, I don't know, maybe I should just get a job because I think it would be easier. I would love to work for a sports team. And I went to a connection of mine. I'm like, hey, what's available? I'd love to like work on your team. And they're like, nope. They're like, I've been following your path. They're like, you have to stick with it. And I'm glad they almost, let's say, turned me down or didn't even let me apply to the job, because they're like, you have to keep at it, because also what I've been able to learn now is almost like an incubator, right? It's gonna make me learn so much faster. But yeah, I absolutely agree with what you're saying, where sometimes you just gotta, well, keep your eye on the prize, let's say,
Yeah.
right? And no, I think that's fantastic, and that's why I love asking the question at the very end. I think it puts a perfect bow on it all. And yeah, Jim, unless there's anything else you'd like to share, this was great.
No, it's fun. I'm always happy to see if I can import something that will try and help people, because that's what life's all about. So thank you for having me on, Chris. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And at the very least, I took a bunch of notes. That was valuable, and I'm sure everyone listening did as well. So thank you to everyone listening. Thank you to Jim. And that's all for episode 122 of The Route. Stay tuned for next week's episode. Thank you.
Thank you.